I was having a talk with my buddy the other night. Um, we started talking about some stuff, I guess as as buddies do. Um, but we kind of touched on something that I've kind of been thinking about, and I guess it got me thinking about who I am as a Christian now versus who I was as a Christian. Um, really not that long ago, but especially some years ago when I first accepted Christ. And I kind of, I think in the moment, I was just really curious. You got all these questions that go around. Well, if there's a man that lives in some remote island that never hears the gospel and he dies, does he go to hell? Or how could a just God, um, you know, create hell? I mean, all these questions that you hear over and over and over and over again. And I was kind of consumed by those questions and a whole bunch of other ones. And one if I got an answer, then that answer led to a different question, and then I would pursue the answer to that. And if I didn't get an answer, I was bummed or maybe borderline depressed. And then if I did get an answer, then all it did was just lead to another question. But I started thinking about, um, I guess, the difference in my walk now versus then. And I think in hindsight, I kind of, when I was talking to my buddy the other night, I think this is something that I realized is that as a younger, not person, but Christian, in hindsight, I feel like I didn't want God to be God. Um, I didn't want God to be God, and I didn't want to be his follower, essentially. I mean, that is not at all what I was thinking at the time. I mean, I definitely wanted to be his follower. But again, this is in hindsight. Looking back on it, it almost seems as if I didn't really want to be God's follower, because we think so much of ourselves as a society, as just people in general, not even just strictly American, but all of us, across the whole world. We think so much of ourselves that, we're so proud, of what we can understand or the things that we can figure out or find out or learn. And I think we're so prideful that it doesn't even occur to us that there's probably questions that we'll never even have the capacity to answer. And already somebody would get offended at that and saying, well, that's what we're doing with all this research. And I'm saying, but stop thinking so limited, which sounds weird based off of the previous statement, of course. My phone's ringing. Hang on a sec. Okay. Okay, well, that train of thought got derailed. Um, Stop thinking so limited. Strange thing to say after the previous statement. So, the cosmos are vast. And apparently, the theory is that they're ever expanding. And the only reason why I say theory is because it seems like we're just constantly finding out stuff that we thought for sure is, 20 years later, you know, not a planet anymore, little Pluto plug. Um, just little things like that. But, you know, basically what I'm saying is learning things, finding things out, solving equations, you know, discovering not just our atmosphere, but basically space and time and all those things. That stuff is great. And we can pursue the knowledge and information of that stuff all we want, but we need to remember that there will always be things that go beyond our capacity. But the more we find out, or the more we learn, or the more that we discover, the more a statement like that is going to be hissed at. And that's fine. Hiss away. But it's important to remember that we are finite. And being finite is okay. That's the key. Wrestling with finite versus not wrestling with it. And I think all of that to say that that's kind of where I was maybe as a young Christian. Looking back on it now, I wanted God to be omnipotent, all-knowing, omniscient, omnipresent, all these, fancy words. But at the same time, I wanted him to be those things so that he could teach me those things or show me those things. And in a roundabout way, much like Job I identify with a lot. It's amazing. Not in anything good that Job did, but anyway, this isn't about me. But Job ranted and raved with God and asked chapter after chapter of just questions. And then finally God shows up and God says, dress for action like a man. And I don't know like Hebrew text or, manuscripts and all this other stuff, but just as in the limited, me reading that, my initial reaction is that God shows up and says, you know what, Job, you better hold on to something. Because you've been asking me all these questions that you're struggling with, that you think, you need the answer to. But instead of answering all those questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a series of questions that are even more difficult than the ones that you asked. And at the end of all that, Job isn't furious anymore somehow, even though there was no clarity given. None of his questions were answered, but he got asked even more difficult questions by the creator of the universe. And somehow in all that, Job's response was, these things are far too hard for me to understand, or, something to that effect. These things are too hard to understand, too hard to comprehend. And instead of being angry at that, he's humbled and somehow has peace. And I think after that conversation with my buddy, it kind of dawned on me that maybe I didn't really want God to be God. Maybe I wanted to be co-God with God. And then God shows up and says, hey, you want to know everything? Are you sure about that? Because, yeah, sure, the keys to the cosmos and all this other stuff, infinite knowledge and wisdom will be unlocked. But guess what? You're also going to see the horror that man does on a daily basis. People and animals being mistreated, shot and left for dead, raped and mutilated. I don't want to know that stuff. And if not knowing that stuff means not knowing infinite knowledge or wisdom, then that's fine too, because I'm not God, and it was never meant for me to be. But God is God, and I do my best to be his follower.